difficulty. I doubt that any politician or any party of any persuasion is going to tackle this with the scale of radical reforms that are needed.
Donald Dewar, is the system, has it just grown too big, and is it now just too difficult to reform?
It's difficult, certainly, to reform. People have tried for a long time and manifestly failed, as your film suggested. I think the great disappointment, in a sense, was the Fowler Review, which created a great deal of anxiety and came up with no radical changes. It came up with a lot of the unpopularity, but it didn't achieve very much. And what it turned out to be was rather a technical exercise of looking at one benefit and giving a little here and taking from others, a kind of revolving door approach. I think the thing that one ought to stress is that the staff are left to struggle. It's not their failure. They're left to struggle with an extremely complicated system dealing with economic recession on a wide scale. I mean, the key factor at the moment, so far as the benefit agency and the system is concerned, is the rise in unemployment. Because every time you put another 100,000 on the unemployment roll, it's going to cost the DSS another £330, £340 million in benefit, and there's an enormous knock-on effect. It's not a case of dismantling the system. It's very interesting. The runaway benefit you were talking about, invalidity benefit. But it went on to say, of course, it was a lifeline for the valleys. If we leave the valleys of South Wales in that state, then of course there are going to be problems of financing the social damage and the misery that that unemployment and recession precedes.
Fran Bennett, if, as we saw on the film, some people are not getting the help they need, while other people are getting help they are not strictly entitled to, surely there must be something basic and seriously wrong with the system itself.
Well, I think your film did identify, for example, that under the Social Fund, a lot of people are not getting the help they need. And one of the most urgent reforms to the system is a radical reform of the Social Fund to make sure people are getting the help they need. The other thing you were talking about was invalidity benefit, but interestingly, you made the point that that was perhaps being used as a long-term benefit for the unemployed. Now, to me, that would argue that we need a long-term national insurance benefit for the unemployed. It doesn't argue that there's anything wrong with invalidity benefit as such.
But do you object to the way in which, according to our film, the invalidity benefit was being, as it were, got round in order to be a substitute for long-term unemployment benefit?
Well, of course, benefits should be governed by their rules, and I mean, I could cite you lots and lots of cases where people had been challenged on invalidity benefit, that they were capable of light work and therefore they were tipped off invalidity benefit onto unemployment benefit. So I don't think you necessarily chose a typical example, and I think you admitted that in the film.
Andrew Neil, when you say this is almost an unreformable system, and bearing in mind what Howard Glenister of the LSE said in the film about a system as Byzantine as this, not being able to be reformed by a process of tinkering, what do you think, despite all the problems you began by outlining, do you think can actually be done?
Well, you have a welfare establishment that is enormously resistant to change. Once you introduce a benefit, you can never get rid of it. I mean, the fact is, let's not mince words here, the invalidity benefit has turned out to be an enormous con. It is going to many people who don't need it at all. It's become a substitute for unemployment benefit. It was meant, originally devised, to go to people who were physically incapable of work. It wasn't meant as a kind of form of regional policy for the Welsh valleys, but you get people defending it nevertheless. So
It wouldn't save money, though, would it, to rationalise it? Because presumably the people who are long-term unemployed in the Welsh valleys, Donald was making this point, would have to be paid for by some other route anyway.
My point is not about saving money. My point is the very general one that we spend $70 billion a year, as you said in the programme, a third of all public spending on welfare benefits, and yet we still have those pockets of poverty that you saw in Easterhouse in Glasgow in the film. Now, there is clearly a mismatch of resources to need, and something has to be done. But I come back to the systemic point, that everywhere, every time some reform has been tried, the Fowler reforms were small beer anyway, they're essentially administrative, they didn't go to the heart of it, well, they were useless.
Mr. Fowler, as he then wasn't, said, I've rewritten Beveridge.
Very good to see politicians now be responsible for the things they said 7 or 8 years ago, and we should listen to him now and what he says about Maastricht or anything else with the same... Well, we're on the record. We have to stand by it and often get it wrong too. Yeah. But it's not just Britain. In the United States, a very distinguished senator, Democratic senator, Pat Moynihan, in the late 60s, attempted a fundamental reform of the American Social Security system with Nixon as president, to go to a tax credit system. Ted Heath looked at it here. He was seen off in a year by the welfare establishment.
You mean integrating the tax and benefit system so that everyone, as it were, has got just one account with the state?
There is, I believe, we should determine an income which is basic needs. What is a basic income below which we don't want anybody to fall. And you then have a continuum. People below that basic income get tax credits. They get their income topped up. People above that income get taxed.
Is that the right approach, Donald Dewar? The Labour Party is about to embark on a major inquiry into the whole issue of social justice. Is that one of the things that might be on your agenda?
It's certainly be one of the things they'll be looking at. I have to say to Andrew Neil that it's a road that many people have tried to travel, and there are great difficulties in it. The arithmetic is sometimes very unsympathetic. But yes, it's certainly something we'll look at. I think one's got to look at the national insurance principle 50 years on from Beveridge. There are major arguments there. But I think the important point to make is that we mustn't run away with the idea, despite the charges that were made in your film, that there are vast sums of money being unnecessarily spent. I mean, those people on invalidity benefit are people who would have to be on income support or some other form of benefit if they want an invalidity benefit. And what I do think is, even if you imagine there are some people on the edges who are getting the benefit for which it was not originally designed, what you don't do is merely cut the benefit for everyone. I mean, the average payment of invalidity benefit is around £66, £67 per week. There's no easy living on benefit. And what we've got to try and do is simplify it, make sure it gets certainly to the people who need it, but don't imagine rather arrogantly that in some sort of way, if we just managed to make it a little bit more efficient, we wouldn't have to spend the 70 billion, unless we do something about the number of people who are casualties of our present society and our present system. Then we're going to have that kind of bill to meet.
Are you prepared to consider doing something for these casualties by, for example, questioning the whole flat rate universal tenet of the Beveridge system? Why is it right or efficient, for example, that at the moment flat rate benefits like child benefit and retirement pensions should be paid to everyone across the board, whether they really need them or not?
Because I think the system is always going to be a mixture of universal and targeting. Even if you do go for a set kind of minimum income for everyone, then you're going to have to build targeted benefits over above for the disabled, for the sick, for those who are suffering from industrial injury. There's no way out of that. It's where you strike the balance. And certainly the Labour Party, John Smith has said, an open-minded examination. The job that Fowler didn't do, but doing it from a different political point of view, a different social point of view. I'm proud of that. The trouble is, every time you say that, every time you say, right, that's still on the agenda, we will look at that balance. We will look at negative income tax and bringing together the tax and benefit system. Then you get someone like Mr. Peter Lilly standing at the dispatch box saying the Labour Party is going to means test the basic pension. It's just not true. But at least we should get credit for being prepared to tackle some of the issues.
How far would you be prepared, Fran Bennett, to go down the road of ending the universal principle and introducing more means testing, however much pain it might cause to a Labour spokesman introducing such measures?
I think that would be a real mistake. I mean, our social security system does different kinds of things, and that's why there are different kinds of benefits. For one thing, it tries to meet the extra costs which people on similar incomes might have. For example, a single person doesn't need as much income as a single person with a child, or a couple with a child. So partly it's to meet extra costs, either for children or, for example, the extra costs of disability. Partly it's to protect all of us against risks such as unemployment and, of course, the well-known risk of retirement. And partly, of course, you have to have a means-tested safety net. Now, if you went down the road that Andrew Neil is suggesting, which is basically means-testing everybody via the tax system, then all you're doing is fulfilling one of those aims of the social security system, which is to provide a minimum safety net. We would think that it has many wider roles than that, which ought to be preserved.
Andrew?
It's doing these roles so badly that it should concentrate on what it needs to do best. I mean, we've just seen in a system here a woman crying in front of your camera because she can't even get something as basic as a cooker and, from the social fund. And yet my middle-class friends who are married with children are saving up